The treehouse witness. This happened just a few weeks ago, and it's still fresh in my mind. I'm a sophomore at a university in Oregon, but my hometown is a quiet suburb in upstate New York. This all unfolded during fall break in October when I flew back home to spend a few days with my parents. While I love being home, it's always a mix of emotions. My parents are kind and loving, but they're also strict and set in their ways, which can make things a little tense, right? One thing we've never seen eye to eye on is their stance on marijuana. Even though it's been legalized in New York, they'd absolutely lose their minds if they knew I smoked. To them, I'm still their little kid, and it's hard for them to fully accept that I'm an adult now. Whenever I'm home, I go to great lengths to make sure they never find out. I've become pretty good at sneaking around over the years. Late-night escapades, hiding things in plain sight. It's practically second nature to me at this point. My dad has an uncanny ability to sniff out anything suspicious, so smoking inside the house is out of the question. Luckily, I still have my old childhood treehouse. My parents built it for me when I was around 9 years old, and despite its age, it's held up surprisingly well. Nestled high in a sturdy oak tree in the front yard, it's just out of sight from the house. It's the perfect spot for some privacy, and I've used it countless times to sneak away when I needed to be alone. From up there, I can see the yard, the street, and the house without anyone noticing me unless they know exactly where to look. It was the Saturday before I was supposed to fly back to school, and my parents had gone to a banquet that was going to run late into the evening. I had the house to myself for hours, but I still didn't want to risk getting caught. So I grabbed my stash and climbed up into the treehouse. The chill in the air made my breath visible, and the nostalgia of being up there hit me hard. I sat on the creaky wooden floor, watching the sunset as memories of my childhood flooded back. I thought about how much I loved being in that treehouse as a kid, using it as a fortress, a pirate ship, or just a quiet place to escape. Now, as an adult, it had a different kind of significance, a refuge from judgment and stress. I felt as the sun dipped below the horizon, I took a deep breath and tried to let my thoughts drift. It was peaceful, quiet, and exactly what I needed before heading back to the chaos of college life. The tree branches swayed gently in the cool breeze, their rustling sound blending with the distant hum of crickets. But the peace didn't last. By the time I finished and started packing up my things, it was mostly dark outside. That's when I noticed it, a light turning on inside the house. My chest tightened. I was absolutely certain I was the only one home. I froze, staring at the illuminated window. My mind raced through possible explanations, but none of them made sense. That instinctual sense of fear kicked in, the kind that makes the hairs on your neck stand up. I couldn't take my eyes off the light, as if it were pulling me in. And now, I wondered. Then, movement in the backyard snapped me out of my trance. 3 hooded figures were creeping around, moving quickly and deliberately. My stomach dropped. They were circling the property like they knew exactly what they were doing. I watched in stunned silence as the figures moved to the front steps. That's when a 4th figure opened the door from the inside and let them in. My heart sank as the reality of the situation hit me. My house was being robbed. The corridor was empty, the cupboards all empty. I didn't know what to do. My body felt paralyzed, and my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. Part of me wanted to believe it wasn't real, that I was misinterpreting things. But the more I watched, the clearer it became. This was happening. One of the intruders stayed outside, pacing the yard like a lookout. My instincts finally kicked in and I reached for my phone. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it and dialed 911, whispering to the operator about what was happening. I gave them my address and described the situation before hanging up. But as I lowered my phone, the light from the screen must have caught the lookout's attention. He turned sharply, his hooded face angling toward the treehouse. My heart stopped. I ducked behind one of the wooden walls, praying he hadn't seen me. A few seconds later, I heard a voice shout, "Hey!" My worst fear was confirmed. He had spotted me. I peeked through a crack in the wood and saw the figure walking toward the tree, his movements purposeful and unrelenting. He reached the base of the tree and started climbing the wooden planks nailed to the trunk. Panic surged through me. "The police are on their way!" I screamed, hoping to scare him off. But he didn't stop. He kept climbing, his hands gripping the planks with terrifying determination. Desperation took over. I grabbed the only thing within reach, my glass bong, and hurled it at him. It hit him square in the head. Shattering on impact, he let out a pained yell and lost his grip, falling to the ground with a thud. For a moment I thought he might try again, but instead he scrambled to his feet and ran toward the house, shouting something to the others inside. Moments later, all 4 intruders bolted out the back and disappeared into the night. The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights illuminating the street. I climbed down from the treehouse, my legs trembling so badly I could barely stand. I tried to explain what had happened, but my words came out in a jumbled mess. The police arrived with Detective Franklin Arrow and got me tied up in the treehouse. I couldn't remember. The officers reassured me and began searching the property. I told them I hadn't seen a getaway car and couldn't make out any of their faces. My parents arrived not long after, their expressions a mix of worry and relief. They hugged me tightly, grateful that I was safe. "Where is everything?" The police suspected the robbery had been planned, that the intruders knew my parents would be out that night. What they hadn't counted on was me being there. I'm back at school now, but the fear hasn't left me. Every night I lie awake, imagining what could have happened if that guy had made it into the treehouse. Worse, I can't stop worrying about my parents. They're still at home, alone, in that quiet suburb. I keep telling myself it's over, that those people won't come back, but some part of me isn't so sure. I hope this is the last I ever hear of them, but if anything happens, I'll let you know. God forbid, I'll have to give an update. The haunting memory of Maplewood. When I was a kid, I experienced something that still haunts me to this day. It's one of those memories that sticks with you, a shadow lingering in the corner of your mind, refusing to let go no matter how many years pass. My family moved into our house in Maplewood when I was 4 years old. I don't remember much about the house we lived in before, but this house became my childhood home. It was a modest 2-story house with a big backyard bordered by tall oak trees. To my brother Kyle and me, it felt like a dream come true. Kyle is 2 years older than me, so he was 6 when we moved in. We just arrived at the age where having a backyard to explore felt like the greatest adventure. But what really sold the house to my parents was the treehouse. The previous owners had built the treehouse for their kids, and it was clear they had put a lot of effort into it. It wasn't one of those flimsy, thrown-together structures. It had a sturdy wooden frame, a pitched roof, and walls with cut-out windows. There was even a trap door and a ladder leading up to it. For Kyle and me, it was the ultimate fort, a place where we could let our imaginations run wild. Our parents told us stories about how the previous owner's kids had spent hours playing in the treehouse, and we couldn't wait to make our own memories there. We spent countless afternoons turning it into everything from a pirate ship to a medieval castle. It became our sanctuary, a place where the rules of the house didn't apply. As the years went by, Kyle and I started to grow out of the treehouse. By the time I was 12, Kyle had completely lost interest in it, preferring video games and hanging out with his friends. I still visited the treehouse occasionally, But it wasn't the same without Kyle. The magic of those early days had started to fade. By the time I was 12, I'd entered that awkward preteen phase where everything felt like a battle. I was a troublemaker, to put it lightly. I was constantly arguing with my parents, pushing boundaries, and getting into trouble at school. My guidance counselor called my parents regularly to complain about my behavior and slipping grades. It felt like I was always grounded for one thing or another. One weekend, after yet another heated argument with my dad about a call from my counselor, I stormed out of the house. I didn't go far, though. Instead, I grabbed a couple of blankets and pillows and made my way to the treehouse. In the distance, I heard someone cry, matched by the rustling of the branches overhead. This wasn't the first time I'd done this. Whenever I was grounded or angry, I'd head to the treehouse to sulk. My parents knew I did it, and they didn't seem to mind. I think they figured it was better than me running off somewhere they couldn't find me. That night, I brought my Nintendo DS with me, even though I wasn't supposed to be playing video games. I spent hours playing Animal Crossing, trying to forget about the argument with my dad. Eventually, my eyes grew heavy and I drifted off to sleep. I don't know how long I was asleep when I heard it, a voice calling my name. Tommy, Tommy. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The voice sounded distant, almost like it was coming from inside my head. But as I opened my eyes and the grogginess faded, I realized it was real. Tommy, are you up there? The voice was deep, unmistakably a man's voice. My first thought was that it was my dad. Maybe he'd come out to check on me, or maybe he was upset that I hadn't come back inside. I didn't answer right away. Something about the tone of the voice didn't sit right with me. It wasn't angry or concerned. It was calm, almost too calm. I heard the creak of the wooden ladder as someone started climbing up. My heart began to race. The treehouse had no electricity, so it was pitch black inside. All I could see was the faint outline of the trap door as it began to open. A head poked through the opening. I couldn't make out any details, just the shadowy outline of a man's face. He paused, as if waiting for me to speak. "Ah, there you are," he said. I sat frozen, staring at the shadowy figure. Something about the way he spoke sent chills down my spine. It wasn't my dad. I don't know how I knew, but I just knew. "Dad?" I finally said, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. He just stayed there, half in and half out of the treehouse, as if studying me. My eyes were starting to adjust to the darkness, but I still couldn't make out his face. Panic set in. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the window. "Dad!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. "Dad!" A light flicked on in my parents' bedroom, and I heard the sound of footsteps hurrying toward the backyard. The man didn't say another word. I heard him climb down the ladder and take off running. Moments later, my parents burst through the back door, my dad holding a flashlight. I climbed down from the treehouse as fast as I could and threw myself into my mom's arms, sobbing. I told my parents everything. To my relief, they believed me. My dad even called my uncle, who was a police officer, to report the incident. The next day, my uncle came by to take my statement. The next morning, my father started therapy. He had directed my 10th birthday in September. There wasn't much I could tell him. The man's voice was deep, and he'd known my name. That was all I had. The police searched the neighborhood but found no signs of anyone suspicious. No one else had seen or heard anything. That meant that there was no proof of anyone suspicious, at least no proof of my existence. For a while, my dad suspected one of our neighbors, a man who lived across the street. He'd always been a bit odd, and my dad thought it was possible he'd overheard my name and decided to play a prank. But we could never prove anything. I never spent another night in the treehouse. In fact, I barely went near it after that. Every time I saw it, I felt a knot of fear in my stomach. I'd often catch myself staring at the neighbors across the street, wondering if it had been one of them. But I could never be sure. We moved out of that house when I was 14, and while I was excited for a fresh start, I couldn't help but feel like I was leaving something unresolved. To this day, I don't know who that man was or what he wanted. All I know is that he knew my name, and that thought still sends chills down my spine. Exercise. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself thinking about that shadowy figure and the deep voice calling my name. I wonder if he's still out there, somewhere, waiting for another opportunity to climb into someone else's treehouse.